Thank you to all of you for being here in the afternoon, straight after lunch. Really enjoying having this last set of conversations, and we're about to really enjoy having this next set of conversations. So, I'm Amar Ananda. I run the Kawi Safi Fund. It feels a little bit deja vu because I was up at this panel a little bit earlier today, but really nice to be here and awesome to see all of you engaged in this conversation. So this one's about holistic energy and how we drive to a holistic energy system. What is a holistic energy system? It's this idea that the energy drives a chicken and egg type scenario, right? We need to generate energy, but if we don't have an off-taker, that you can't drive the economics to make the generation happen. The off-takers generally don't get to the point of being big enough off-takers unless they can have dependable energy. And you need all of the pieces of the system to work together to make a holistic energy system happen. And part of that is energy, as we've traditionally seen it, has been utility scale energy, grid, and then consumer. That's diversifying. As we drive with technology advantages, we now have distributed energy, we have different forms of energy that have been created at a small scale, at a larger scale, and we have a great panel up ahead of us who are going to talk about what that distributed energy system looks like, what the distributed production system looks like, what the consumption system looks like, and how it ties together, and how that drives towards a low carbon transition, which is what we all need to see in the world. So I'm going to initially invite Lindsay to come up and give a couple of minutes, a 10-minute presentation to kind of set the stage a little bit on this conversation, to talk a little bit about how some interventions have happened in the financing of the energy system. And that's going to anchor us in this conversation about thinking about how we can use instruments like blended finance, like concessional finance, like alternative debt platforms to get the kinds of capital to work in this market in the way that are really effective for the market. And part of that is that you want horses for courses, right? You want to have the right type of finance for the right type of company, for the right type of stage of company. But it's also that you want to have the right type of finance for the right stage of where the energy system is at. And so, Lindsay, without further ado, I'm going to ask you to come up and help us get a bit situated in a specific example, sort of kicked off this industry in some ways around COVID. But that's going to lead us, I think, into a really great conversation about how we can use some of our experience and heritage in this space to drive a really exciting agenda looking forwards. So, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Amar, and thank you to the Green Climate Fund for including me in this event. It's been a great day. I am a little short, so I will bring the microphone down a bit. And thank you for joining us after lunch. I'm sure many of you are feeling that after lunch low. So Amar and I wanted to make sure this panel and just even this presentation is really engaging. I've had the honor of spending the last 19 years building clean energy companies in Africa. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about how can we continue to accelerate the clean energy transition and how can we use innovative financing facilities to do that, as Amar said. As a bit of background, before I get into a few questions from the audience, so get ready to engage in a minute. Today I am the managing partner of a venture capital fund and studio called Delta 40, and we invest in and provide operational support to early and growth stage climate companies in Africa, particularly ones led by diverse founders on the ground in Africa. I'm also an operating partner at Equator Fund that provides growth capital to these companies. And before this, I spent 10 years building an energy company myself. I was CEO of Phoenix International, and over the course of a decade and many highs and lows, took Phoenix from an idea to an acquisition to Engie. And today I sit on the board of 4 clean energy and energy access companies, which we're talking about today, Sunfi, Ampersand, Gridless, and Easy Solar. So today I'd like to kind of talk about some of the highs, but also some of the challenges in a really open way. Amar said, no patting each other on the back. We have to have an open conversation. And along that journey, There's been a different moments of, equity booms and carbon booms and equity lows and carbon lows, and some have seen this sector as an opportunity, and at other times we see it as a crisis we need to pull ourselves out of. So I want to start off this discussion with a quick question for the audience. First, we're going to get to know you, and then we're going to see how you are seeing this opportunity today. So for our panel too, we wanted to know who we're speaking to. So in the audience, could you raise your hand if you are an investor in the climate sector? Investors, raise your hands high, especially for all the entrepreneurs in the room. Just leave those up a minute so they can find you in the next networking break. Investors, okay. If you are an entrepreneur or CEO of a climate company, could you raise your hand? Okay, great. If you are a policymaker, could you raise your hand? Okay, just a few of those. Okay, you guys are very important too, so we'll come find you. And then an ecosystem player, facilitating the growth of the ecosystem. Great. Okay, so we have mostly investors and a good amount of ecosystem players and some of the leaders driving these new solutions. So I think with that, we now want to ask you, do you see the current climate opportunity, the current investments in climate as an opportunity, or do you see climate change as a crisis that we need to urgently address? And some of us, we all see it as both, but I want to know predominantly, are you feeling opportunistic? Are you seeing big returns and opportunities on the horizon? Raise your hand. Okay, raise it high so I can just get a sense. All right, so I'm seeing, okay. Do you see this as a crisis, that if we don't act now, we are going to, really face an even worse outlook, that we need to act because this is a crisis here and globally? Raise your hand. All right, more of us, Amar, see it as a crisis than an opportunity. So we'll see where we get to at the end of this panel. Yes, so very briefly, we're now just going to jump into a facility called EARF, which was the Energy Access Relief Fund. And this is one example, but we want to look at it as an innovative financing tool that helped navigate the clean energy transition. Do I have a clicker, or is somebody clicking the slides for me? Thank you. All right, so I will go through these very briefly. Okay. Oh, where's Eduardo? Okay, this is not the right presentation. So I don't know if Eduardo, I will keep going for the sake of time, but if Eduardo is around, I think we gave you a different presentation, but I will keep moving because I want to keep this discussion going. So at a high level, over the last 10 years, and I have my slides here, luckily, the energy access industry has brought clean and affordable energy to 10.5 million businesses across Africa and over 300 million people. We have taken electrification rates from 42% to 56% just through the energy access portion of the industry. We were making great progress, and there was actually a lot of new equity investments just before COVID going into the space. There were acquisitions. COVID came. And as you all know, 2 out of 3 businesses were facing solvency issues, and 4 out of 5 were facing serious supply chain issues. And we really needed a fast, innovative fund to address that. And at that moment, 2 institutions came together, Green Climate Fund and Acumen, and they very quickly said, we need a solution. There's a lot of risk, but it's urgent. Let's make this happen. They brought together 16 governments, foundations, and investors and identified SEMA to manage this fund, and they put together the Energy Access Relief Fund. The Energy Access Relief Fund was a $90 million fund that provided concessional loans to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The ticket sizes were $500K to $2.5 million, and the goal was to make these happen very quickly. They ended up deploying this in 22 countries across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And just that alone is a major feat, to be able to put together an innovative facility quickly and deploy it into such different sized businesses in 22 countries around the world, and we need more of that. And I was a board director of one of the organizations that received a loan from EARF and wanted to share just a very brief overview of how that impacted us. So at that moment, like many companies, we were raising capital to grow. And people still need energy in the time of COVID, and in Sierra Leone, where this company was operating, Liberia, and many other hard-to-reach countries, often these solutions are the only options. These off-grid solar home systems are the only way households, businesses can continue to access energy. And so this company was really facing solvency issues and was not able to order any more inventory and support the customers and the employees they had. So EARF offered, after due diligence, offered us a loan to continue operating. This was an $800,000 USD loan with a grace period of 1 year, an interest rate of 5%, and it was deployed at a real important time when nobody else was deploying capital. And this capital not only helped us continue to operate in that period, but also helped us continue to bring in other commercial capital behind the company following COVID. And here in Africa, the COVID crisis, the actual one was happening. We felt some of the impacts less than we do now. Today we have currency issues that all companies are facing. And so EARF did not just help us in the time of COVID, it helped us today, where it helped bring in more capital behind us. With that, we were able to, and this was a requirement, a unique requirement of EARF. They did say you have to continue employing your staff. You have to retain your staff. You have to hire women and keep your gender balances. You have to continue investing in ESG. And those are requirements. So as a board director, it helped us continue to do the things that were mission aligned in a financial time of difficulty. And in the end, the company has been able to significantly increase its revenue since receiving this. So we have an 80% increase in sales and revenue just in the time after we received EARF, allowing us to retain 230 full-time employees and 500 agents. Oh, great. Thank you so much. There we go. This is a little overview of Easy Solar. Okay, now, here we go. This is what it all added up to. Of the 90 companies that received EARF funding, we were able to facilitate 5.2 megawatts of installed capacity. We created and retained 12,000 green jobs. We impacted almost 3 million lives. And this supported 16 female-led companies. And I can tell you, 16 out of 90 is much larger percentage than the number of female-led energy companies in Africa. And so it was great to see that impact. It was also 1.3 megatons of CO2 averted. In the end, what did we learn from this? And this is what the panel, I'm kind of now moving to what we're going to discuss on this panel. Many insights. We need innovative, blended, fast-moving facilities to help companies, not just in tough times, but in good times. And we need that flexibility from the LPs and the GPs. And we need all of them to work together. We also just kind of need to meet companies where they are. What I loved about it is not the big names in energy access that have gobbled up a lot of the financing did not get this money. This went to a broader range of companies that were actually on the ground and really kind of on the front lines of energy access. And I really was inspired by that when I learned more about EARF. I think that the things that we'd like to improve in the future facilities, and I know GCF feels the same way, is these loans were in USD. And one of the things as a director of many companies we're facing is the currency issue is really hurting a lot of companies. So in the future, if these facilities could be local currency or come with affordable, appropriate hedging facilities, I think we all need this in this room. So that's something we'd like to talk about. And then finally, I'll just say that I think, and I learned a lot more about EARF in preparing for this presentation. I think we need an EARF for good times to support the good companies that have good traction and now need to scale. We have a gap of capital. We have early stage VC. We have post-profit, post-cash flow positive private equity. There is a gap. And we need to help companies get from the early stage with the innovative ideas to private equity or to mergers and acquisitions that could really scale this. And I'll just end with one comment because I have 30 seconds on my timer. And then I'll hand it over to Amar, is that at Phoenix, the company I built for 10 years, we as entrepreneurs and early stage VC-backed company, we took the Phoenix idea from an idea to traction to about 4 countries across Africa. And then we ended up putting together a strategic partnership with Anji and brought in a corporate company that could really truly take that to scale. And I heard in an earlier session that exits are a problem. The exits are possible, but we have to help companies get from early stage to where the corporates will acquire them. So I just want to put a call out. Let's have more innovative financing to make that happen. And I look forward to all of your thoughts and ideas on this topic as well. Thank you, Amar. And I think I'm handing it over just in time.
That was really awesome, Lindsay. Do you want to start to have a seat? And we'll bring the rest of the panel up. Really terrific set of questions. If I could invite the panel to come and join us up on the stage, that would be great. I'm going to just run through getting you all into your seats. Please choose to sit wherever you'd like to sit before we get questions about that. And Lindsay, you did a great job. Thank you for pushing through despite having your slides. I know how hard that can be. So awesome that you managed to do that. Okay, so you've set us up with a couple of questions. Before I kick off the panel, and I'll allow everyone to introduce themselves as we start the conversation, I just wanted to say that we are missing one panel member. So Alexander Rutter is a private sector specialist at the International Solar Alliance, and he wasn't able to make it here today. Gives his regrets, but we would have loved to have had him, but he wasn't able to make it. So this is the panel we have, and it's a really great panel. You've already heard from Lindsay. There's some real talent that sits around this table, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. You've just heard a few things from Lindsay that set up a question. So I'm going to do a rapid fire for each of the panel to get you to respond to this. Lindsay kind of laid out some ideas, like an ERF for good times was one of the key things I heard you pick up there. Something that really thinks through local currency as well as US dollar currency, innovative, blended, fast, that really drives to scale. Something that really builds a legacy that you're seeing in the industry today and then drives that legacy forwards. So, question to all of you. A minute or two each. So really rapid fire. How do you see this industry moving forwards, and what do you see we've learned from the RF as an innovative instrument in this world? Anita, over to you first. There's a microphone. You've literally got a minute, and then I'm going to get you to pass it on.
Okay, Anita George, Edina Capital, and I have to thank Lindsay because you set the stage for me to say that what Edina Capital does is exactly where you said there's a valley of death in the middle between early investors and the late stage big investors. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karin Isaksson, and I'm the Managing Director of the Nordic Development Fund. We're the joint Nordic Climate Fund. And to say very one sentence about myself, I consider myself to be a development finance professional. I've been in the business since the mid-80s, so it's a few years. Did you want us to say something about our take as well now on this, where we are in the situation, or? I want you to just give us some feedback on what you just said. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that we are in a very interesting phase right now, and I think that we really have to rethink on how we approach the sometimes what you talk about as the energy trilemma, that we need to provide reliable, low-cost, affordable energy. And I would also like to remind ourselves of a basic rule in economics, that there is always a supply side and a demand side. And here I think that we also in Africa should think more about the energy efficiency aspects, because what is driving Africa's development is not just the agriculture side of the development, but also the very rapid urbanization, and to use energy more efficiently in urban communities by e-mobility, energy efficient buildings, the energy efficient industrialization, I think can also bring a lot to the table when it comes to provide reliable and affordable energy to the masses. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was really exciting, and it's great to see the impact Earth has generated on the ground. I must say, it's an honor. It's a privilege to see this happen. I was leading that transaction from the GCF side, along with my colleague who's over here, and it's great that this materialized. A bit about myself. I was part of the GCF startup team when the GCF was founded and started operations in 2015. And I was at the forefront of leading some of the private sector transactions that went through in the initial days that involved energy transition, and seeing them generate impacts at this point of time is quite fulfilling. Talking about what you had mentioned, Lindsay, I would say energy transition is here to stay. It'll happen. Now, the question is the pace, right? How could we creatively use blended finance to accelerate the transition to meet the climate needs, the climate urgency, as we call it, is where we can play a difference with the kind of flexible capital we have, with the kind of flexible capital other institutions like the NDF have, and that's where we could help make that transition happen.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Brian Wambani, Investment Director and Director for East Africa at CAMCO, which is a Climate and Impact Fund Manager. Just one thing I wanted to mention, Amar, regarding Lindsay's talk was that, we talk about transition, but you're actually talking about transformation there. What we're looking at is, transformative thinking, transformative finance, and so that's just my takeaway from that discussion that was brought about by Lindsay.
Awesome. Okay, so we've had some rapid fire responses. Lindsay, you set us up with a framework and really a catalyst for this conversation. Right? In a way, what the ERF did was it set up a platform, it set up a process for an industry as a whole to respond to an intervention, right? to respond to a circumstance on the ground. We find ourselves at a moment, whether it's a crisis, Lindsay, or whether it's an opportunity, whether it's us looking into the abyss or us looking up at the sterling heights of mountains, where I think everyone here on this panel made mention of speed and urgency. So whatever motivates us to move into that speed and urgency framing, be it crisis or be it opportunity, there's a real need for that speed and urgency piece to take off. So, Brian, I'm going to pass the mic back to you. I'm going to ask a little bit about you to talk about your experience at CAMCO. Tell us what you did there. Tell us how you supported the evolution of the energy system through your work. What have been some of your challenges and what have been some of your experiences?
Okay, so CAMCO, as a Climate and Impact Fund Manager, manages what is known as the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. And in that platform, we finance small to medium-sized renewable energy projects. We're actually the number 2 mini-grid financier on the continent, and over the last 8 years, I've financed around 43 transactions over 20 jurisdictions. Now, how do we go about that? Typically, what we do in our approach, given that we have the small to medium-sized players, is these players tend to need a lot of hand-holding and help because these are not heavily capitalized businesses. And so what we do there is provide a hands-on approach. What does that mean? We work with the developers, provide flexible finance, different structures. We also then take a long-term view. So when we sort of patient. And the third thing we do is provide an enabling environment, right? So but what do we mean by that? In terms of regulation, we're in contact with the regulatory authorities in the different jurisdictions, try and strengthen that process, and provide dialogue around private investors and the government and such activities. That's what has made us uh, come up with some wins over the years.
For that, and also just so succinct. So you talk a little bit about handholding and the work that you do to help your investees on the ground. You talk a little bit about linkages, collaboration, and connecting people in your ecosystem, right? Regulators, on the government side, policymakers, investors, and of course entrepreneurs and the businesses that do the work that we all see on the ground. So if I turn, Anita, to you, you spearheaded, while you were at IFC, not too long ago, but you set some history in IFC because you spearheaded something called Scaling Solar. Tell us a little bit about that. I think it has some echoes of what Brian just said in terms of the collaboration play, but tell us a little bit about your experience there. And let's go beneath the surface. There's some technical stuff, what you had to do, putting papers together, making sure that people understood what it takes to procure solar in a country. But give us some of the real meat on the bones of this story, some of the personal sides to what it took to put that program into play, but explain that program so that the audience understands it as well.
Sure, I'll do that. So I'm going to take you back in time. This is 2009, and solar was a technology, a new technology, proven, but still a new technology and seen as very risky. So at that time, I was with the International Finance Corporation. We took that brave step. So one of the things, Amar, that you asked me to talk about was the fact that I would say 80% of the organization thought it was too risky and not something that we should do. But it took people inside to stick their neck out, and not because it was a nice clean energy form, but based on a lot of research from solar that had already been deployed in the US and Spain and Germany, etc. So doing the groundwork was very important, but having a team inside that was ready to take a risk, put their careers at stake, and it yielded what turned out to be a great business for IFC. IFC invests more than $1 billion every year. What gave me a lot of satisfaction is that that same original megawatt then got invested in when it became a platform of 1,000 megawatts by pension funds. And today, almost every pension fund in the world, I would say, has exposure to renewable energy. And therefore, the question is, what next? And we've seen, because of the comfort that investors have got on solar, and there were key factors. So one was really that the cost of panels, inverters, and the balance of plant came down. The second was we all thought after we did that first megawatt, this is going to replicate itself. It didn't. So that's why we launched Scaling Solar, where we had to get regulatory aspects cleared, a lot of discussions on feed-in tariffs versus auctions. Secondly, on just land availability, location, etc. Third, on financing. So in Scaling Solar, an innovative approach that was taken was attaching the financing and insurance to the documents, which were also common and templatized, I would say, so it made it easier. And then from there, also looking at risk and helping not just the equity financiers, but also the debt financiers get comfortable with the risk. How do you evaluate a solar project, so on and so forth. I have to say, I just checked the numbers, and while I would have wished for more, it's getting close to 500 megawatts under the Scaling Solar program across globally, and in Africa, both implemented and in the pipeline is about 300 megawatts. Good progress, and I hope it will replicate itself even further.
So, Anita, you were there in some ways catalyzing the beginning of this generation. Generation used in two words, right? Generating power and the generation of us that see renewable power as being the mainstay and the potential mainstay. I think it was maybe 10 years later that at the IEA, the declaration was finally made, the International Energy Agency, which is very much a stalwart of energy and the baseload of fossil fuel, but made the declaration that solar is king. And I think part of your work at IFC and part of what you were doing there in this creating of a boilerplate, attaching some of the understanding what pension funds and others need in order to have projects that are bankable, and templaters, you said templatizing that, right? I'd say boilerplating, was a key part of making this industry work. You also said a couple of really interesting things. I mean, I love the big statistics now about the 500 megawatts and the billions of dollars that are flowing in. 80% of the organization at the time thought it was too risky. It makes me think of the work that Rajiv and others are doing at the Green Climate Fund in really putting forwards things that they believe in, that the world needs, and sometimes the institution has to learn from us and learn from you. I think you've just cleared $500 million of transactions in the Green Climate Fund. You and Ayaka led a bunch of transactions this year that you took to board that really show what it takes to get some of these transactions to have in a context where you have both a supportive environment and a real appreciation of the market. One thing that I want to pick up on Anita's comments is that it takes courage. I think that's that piece. It takes courage. When the world doesn't look quite the way that one thinks it needs to, when one has insight to what's challenging about a market and one sits in a position where one can do something about it, it takes some courage to stand out and make that difference. So on that basis, Karen, I'm going to turn to you in the next lineup. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your work. From what I understand, you spent a lot of time in Africa in your life. You've worked in many, many different contexts. You've worked inside of energy, you've worked outside of energy. You've often been at the forefront of spotting markets and supporting countries to become ready for the types of investment innovations that, for example, Anita just talked about. Do you want to share a little bit about what it takes to spot that and to support your partners and players to become investment ready? And what are some of the lessons and insights you might share with us here?
Yes, thank you. So I maybe kick off by coming back to what you said in the introduction about a holistic approach, which I think is extremely important. And we are very lucky at NDF to be able to take the holistic approach and to work both in the public sector and the private sector. So I will expand on that a little bit, but public sector for us means enabling environment, to work together with governments, together with our strategic partners, both within the MDB system and within the UN system and also some other partners that we have, to prepare the ground for actual projects to be financed. And could be public money, could be private money. And we do work not just in energy, we also spot areas such as circular economy, which, I mean, everything in the end, to some extent, spills over into energy. But, for example, circular economy, we have initiated, and we actually initiated this trust fund that is housed within the African Development Bank together with one of our shareholders, the government of Finland. So this is one example of how we really want to be there and kick off and drive change. And then in the public sector, we pick up and mainly invest via different modalities such as impact investment funds. But coming back then, what does it take to have this holistic approach? One thing is that it takes to be able to then offer all sorts of financial instruments. So for us, we can offer grants, loans, and equity. Our shareholders, they are prepared to support us. They encourage us to have a very high concessionality in our financing. That in turn requires us to have a different funding modality than most of the MDBs, and to some extent also the DFIs. And I think that there is a very interesting discussion going on now among the MDBs, how they fund themselves. And my background is also that before I joined NDF, I was the executive director in the African Development Bank. And the way the MDBs fund themselves by having a low risk in the portfolio to ensure the AAA rating and to reach out to markets, I think that this is something that we really have to question. And I do. And it's not just me, this is a dialogue that's ongoing. So, and the same thing, if I may say, about the DeFi, the bilateral DeFi, my former employer Swedfund, they also very risk averse. They cannot rely on their shareholders to support them, so they have to keep a risk in the portfolio where they also can rely on some returns. Luckily, we're not like that. As I said, we're highly concessionary, and our funding is based on return from the portfolio, but also recurrent capital injections. And this is what it takes to be able then to work with grant money in the public sector to fund initiatives like the circular economy, and also to be able to come in the private sector and take high risk. So we are always there in impact investments funds, for example, on the junior tranche. We have quite few partners. One partner that we often cooperate with is KfW, but we'd like to see more, because I really, really think that we need to realize that you cannot change the world without taking risk. And someone has to then also pay for this risk. So that's some examples, and there's many more examples on how we try to have this holistic approach. Maybe one example I share briefly if I have time is also the engagement we have with the African Development Bank on this is renewable energy, the CEFA Trust Fund, which is very much then enabling an environment, guaranteeing that we have the institutional infrastructure and to enable investments, and where we as NDF also has provided funding to sub-funds under CEFA, the off-grid energy facility and the Africa Go Green Fund. And Africa Go Green Fund, I think, is also extremely interesting, because this is the first fund that is very much focused on energy efficiency in Africa, which is quite a new area to us Nordics. Energy efficiency is something that we have engaged in for a long time because we need to keep warm, but energy efficiency, as I said before, is a lot more. And here we also, I think, come across the advantages and the opportunities with the electrification, not just on the African continent, but also Africa as a source of raw material and rare earth minerals that are needed for the electrification. So I think I stop here.
Karen, thank you. I think you bring some real richness to this conversation. A couple of things I took away from that is you talked about the flexibility of the capital that you have in order to take risk. Can I just ask you just one more quick question, so a quick reply on this? You raised a call, in a way, in your words, to the broader DFI community, the multilateral community. We don't need to pin a label on anybody. I was curious, in those conversations which you have, what's the carrot, what's the stick in terms of let's raise the bar on taking risk? How do you have that conversation, and what do you say to folks?
Well, I think it's a very difficult hurdle, and I think for the time being, I think that what we can bring to the table is the fact that we are prepared to take risk, and that by showing, by walk to talk, in taking risks, we could also then find more partners to share this high risk layer in the capital structure together with.
Yeah.
Show that, there is always a difference between the real risk and the perceived risk. So if we can show that we're here, we're taking risks, and it actually turns out quite well, others may be willing to follow.
Karen, thank you for that. So, Lindsay, I'm going to come straight to you. There's the gauntlet in the way for folks like yourself and myself in this world. When we're recipients of capital, either as an intermediary or as an entrepreneur, folks are taking a risk on us. And some of the burden of what Karen put out there is we have to help show those results. We have to start to demonstrate that it was worth taking that risk, and that we can use that capital to scale up both in terms of impact and in terms of the type of returns that those that invest in us believe that we can do. So can you talk a little bit about your experience of what you've seen, both in your personal experience as an entrepreneur in the space? It's incredibly valuable having you here in that role, and now as an investor and as a really strong advocate in our community, a collaborator, someone who really helps to build this whole community. How do you see this journey of tech startups evolving, this space evolving, and how do you see companies in this transition, leading this transition, being able to really get the message right in terms of attracting the kind of risk capital we need to make the difference? Big question. You have some time for an answer.
Great. Hello. Well, yeah, it's a very big question. And I'll just share, in the spirit of where we're going and how we can support these entrepreneurs. I think today, a lot of investors worry about pipeline. And I just want to say, first and foremost, there are a lot of entrepreneurs on the ground that are innovating on the tech side, but also on the business model side or the financing side in the clean energy transition, the climate space, which includes not just energy, but agriculture as well, the energy water nexus. So for me, I think if we want to, just the landscape is there are a lot of also just very experienced entrepreneurs and CEOs entering this space right now. So I will say, the people who are raising capital with Delta 40 and Equator and Kawasaki, I have seen a just dramatic shift in the type of talent that's coming into the climate space. And we see that all around the world. I think now that we can acknowledge nobody is denying the impacts of climate change, the talent coming into this space is exceptional. And so it's our job as investors, I think, to then, take risk on the best teams tackling the biggest problems with the most promising solutions. And we won't always get that right. But in my view, if we invest in the best teams, we're most likely to see success, and they will pivot along those journeys of finding the right solution and business model. So we really look at the teams and the experience of the teams and their ability to not just dream up a solution, but build a company, build a world-class management team, raise the right capital, and execute and scale. So I think that we're looking to back the best teams. And one of the things we look for, a lot of people are looking for technologies. And we think there are some novel technologies that are going to help us in emerging markets. But what's exciting to me and why I'm on that opportunistic side, why I see this as an opportunity, is we don't need novel technologies to solve the energy problems we have today. We don't need 10 years of R&D. We have the proven technologies we need. What we need now is the best talent and the best new business models and the financing to execute that. So that makes me optimistic. And so then I'll just say that kind of then that journey, Amar, what we're missing is we're missing true scale and exits. We see a lot of climate entrepreneurs cracking something in one market or two markets, but what we need to see now is we need to take that on this continent, we need to take that Pan-African, not just for the impact, but actually for the profits and for the returns. The US market, 350 million people in one market, where we have a fragmented market, but there are many business models that can scale. So what I think we need to help the best CEOs do is take a solution in a business model with traction in one market and put the right financing to take that into many markets. And why that's exciting to me, a lot of people see it as hard, and it is, but when I took Phoenix from 1 market to 9, I had a lot more FX risk reduction. I had revenue diversity, right? So when one market was going through drought and one market's going through flood, I have a good harvest in another market and I can generate revenue there. So I just want to put a call out to investors who say, stay in one market until you're profitable. I don't think we can think that way. We need to have the right capital to bring these solutions and diversify our risk and our revenue potential in multiple African markets. And then we need to think about exit from the beginning. So at Delta 40, we talk a lot about we need to take early stage innovation from idea to exit. And I know it sounds so hard because there's been so few exits, but in my view, the last 10 years was about building $1 billion company and then looking for an exit. And I don't think we can think about that in Africa. There are not $1 billion exits. There are no IPOs. So we need to think differently about how we get returns to early investors. So one, they can recycle their capital, but two, to bring the trillions of dollars of climate capital out into the market. So what I think, Amar, there's so much I could say, but a concluding point is how do we help the best teams, the best CEOs, the best solutions that see traction, not talk, not hype, but real traction. How do we put the concessional capital, the innovative capital, and the corporate partnerships behind them to realize scale? And I'll just say one last note is that, when NG acquired Phoenix, we were pre-profit. And I'm saying this because a lot of people are not willing to talk about what it takes to see a real exit and can they be successful. They acquired us pre-profit. We stayed on. We helped them go from 4 countries to 9 countries. And today, NG has made, with the cost of capital they have as a large international NG player, with the team they have, with the scale they have now made this business profitable, and they are scaling it and putting more money into these energy solutions across Africa. So for the corporates, and I don't know, is anyone here from a corporate? We need them in the room, but we need to bring the corporates to the table from the beginning. What solutions are you looking for? Let's do early M&A to really actually get those returns back to the investors and see real scale. So those are some ideas, not to say there aren't challenges on that journey.
Lindsay, it's just so great to have you on this panel because you do nail these critical questions that we all grapple with so much, and you do it with such clarity. So thank you for doing that. So exits really key. We need to have liquidity here at the end of this journey. We need to be able to take more risks so that we can support the teams that we have in this space to really expand beyond market. And you should take personally a huge amount of credit for the work that you do. You talked about the scale of Phoenix in terms of having access to lower cost capital from its ultimate purchaser, NG, which I think is super critical, but they had you as a leader at the time, and I think that set them up for the success that they have. So awesome to see that. Anita, question to you. Lindsay sort of set the stage there and said, this is about teams, this is about exits, no longer about technology. You started out in our narrative today talking about the technology and about the frameworks. How would you now, sitting where you are today, look at this landscape, and how would you respond to some of what you've just heard?
Thanks. So I come from the school of both seeing the urgency that we have to act and also the optimism that Lindsay spoke of. I think that, technology in many ways and innovation, and I agree with you, Lindsay, it's not just technology for technology's sake, but business models, innovative financing, bringing private and public together. All of these really are needed. And I also agree with you that the talent that's coming into the climate space is extraordinary. Most in Edina's pipeline, almost 70% of our founders are second or third time founders. And that really sends a very strong signal to the world. I also think that in terms of getting financing, it's always difficult. And although I've been in investments for more than 30 years, and my partner and I, we've invested together for 15 years, but we are seen as a first-time fund. And a lot of the institutional capital have a policy that says they don't support first-time funds. So these are the kinds of barriers where we really feel that we need to have the support of institutions. Secondly, what gives me hope are actually the entrepreneurs and the companies, because what we've seen in the past, I just read today that Husk Power has said that they are raising $500 million as Sunshot for their Sunshot program. This was a company which 15 years back, IFC gave $150,000. So when you look forward and you see the kind of growth these companies have, similarly, the solar company that I referred to, the first megawatt, gave IFC a 30% dollar return on their investment. So I think for the investors, the institutions, there is really an opportunity here. So yes, we have to act urgently, but the opportunity is huge. Another point I'd like to make is in terms of the exchange between countries, emerging markets. There's huge scope because these technologies don't have boundaries. What works here can work in other parts of the world and vice versa. So I think also these narrow divisions of, are you only focusing on this region or that? Those kind of inhibitions in a digital world, it no longer applies. So we really have to rethink the way we think about these silos.
Thanks, Anita. Such a great point. Technology knows no boundaries. I think builds very much on what Lindsay said about scaling up beyond countries, being able to diversify risk outside of the borders of any one particular place. Rajiv, we're going to turn to you and we're going to build on this. You've heard a lot on this panel and you've been working in this space so prolifically over the last few years. You've been instrumental in both implementing and catalyzing and designing blended facilities in the space, some of the most innovative and some of the largest that we've seen. So tell us what you're seeing today and tell us a little bit reflective on this conversation. How does it make you feel about what we should be seeing on the horizon?
Okay, so this is how I'll begin. You talked about courage, but I think there's another element to it: conviction. Whatever we do, we need to be convinced about it. The GCF at this point of time is one of the largest blended finance institutions with $20 billion of capital that we have to deploy. And I think at the heart of it, there is a hypothesis that markets can be created. I think what we need to realize is blended finance is not free money. And that's an important, it's an important point that many of us do not realize. It took us a number of hits and misses to realize that ourselves when we started on this journey. Essentially, what we are talking about is we use blended finance to test out a hypothesis that the market failure that prevails can be addressed, and we can address the risks that potential investors in the market face. And then we come in with flexible capital support to catalyze action and impact. Now, I'll talk a bit about how we look at it. And again, I'd underscore this point that there have been hits and misses, and this is what we've come up to. There are three pillars on which our blended finance approach rests. Blended finance is all about flexible pricing, not necessarily concessional, but flexible pricing. It's all about flexible tenors as well, and potentially structural subordination. Putting that all together is an element of policy and regulatory support, which is critical to create those markets, which currently may not exist. It requires a careful calibration, which essentially what we've tried to do so far in many of the transactions that you may have seen. So effectively what we are talking about is bespoke solutions that catalyze impact on the ground and yet provide, let's say, the private sector investors and players with a with a demonstration that these themes do work and can be delivered upon. I'll give you a couple of examples. One country on the African continent, um, there were a series of FITs which did not succeed. We worked with our partners, EBRD. Harry and Jean Piero are probably in this room. Worked with them in 2016, 2017 to pull a transaction through. The hypothesis we had was provide some degree of flexible capital, get the market going, but we would have a long-term vision towards bringing down the tariffs through reverse auctions. It started off with FITs at 8.5 cents. Small amount of technical assistance was provided to help the government put in place auction modalities. It happened in 2 years flat. Tariffs went down from 8.5 to sub 2.5. And today, some of those projects are getting refinanced in capital markets. So we're talking about what we would look at going forward is essentially putting together some of these platforms that could essentially do what we had done in the past. Put together some of these projects, bundle them together, put them in a platform, de-risk them, take them to the market, capital markets, unlock liquidity from there. We all know there are pension funds in Europe and North America that have liquidity, but as our colleague from AFC earlier today mentioned, Ellie mentioned, there are African pension funds that have capital, and that capital can go into unlocking capital for new projects in the energy transition space. That is what we could do going forward, and I think that's a huge opportunity that we have. We're talking about energy transition. It's not only about the larger projects. I think the larger projects can be taken to the capital markets if platforms like this are set up. But all we need is liquidity for the smaller and newer ideas, which is where conviction and courage is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate how you picked up on that trend that we identified right at the beginning about courage, and you've added this idea of conviction to it. So flexible, structural, bespoke. How do we, as we look to the horizon, start thinking about local capital? I'm going to shake things up a little bit now. We're going to come back to the panel, but I'm just going to put a call out to anyone in the room who wants to raise their hand for a question. You've heard a lot from our panelists. I think we've had some really deep insights from this conversation so far. We've got plenty more to say, so if nobody raises a question, we're going to carry on. So, any questions? Great. Sometimes you ask that question and wait too long, so this was awesome.
Hi, everyone. There we go. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I work at Quinton West, and we design and structure, sorry, very touchy, blended finance instrument.
Do we maybe have another mic? Charlotte, do you have a very loud voice when you stand up and broadcast?
Thank you, sorry. So we design blended finance instruments and have designed a number in the energy transition space across Africa. And we're currently actually designing a pilot for Kenya to shift healthcare facilities towards renewable energy. So I had two questions, if possible. One is, what do you think are the biggest challenges with moving from design and structuring to actual implementation of blended finance facilities for energy transition? And then the second is, what do you think is the most beneficial use of concessional capital in these structures for de-risking and technical assistance, reducing cost of capital, or other? Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Who am I going to pin for this one? Does anybody want to put their hand up to respond to this question from Charlotte?
Okay, so I kick off, and I think I combine your questions. I do it by using an example then from what we have done with Nordic Development Fund. I think that it's extremely helpful if you have grants, concessionary capital, also for the design and structure. It's not always that you can rely on a fund manager coming to you with the absolutely best idea in an area where you want to deploy your capital. So this is how we work also, that we have a very, now I'm advertising, but we have a very small grant called the booster grant, which is maximum €500,000, which we deploy for the design and structuring of different ventures that we want to enter into. We did that with this off-grid energy facility and contributed then to the design and structuring, went out on the market and procured the fund managers. So that's one way of using grant money. And then, of course, I mean, when it comes to the overall structure of the investment, I think our use of junior equity is something that will help the fund take off the ground. But I also think what you addressed is important, that it's not free money on the table. You have to structure in the waterfalls, so we're prepared to take a risk. We are patient, but if there is a return, we want to be part of that. So some very sort of simple guidelines from my side.
Karen, thanks for that. I think Rajiv wants to come in with a quick one, but I do want to get some more participant questions, so I'm going to go out and then we'll come back. Rajiv.
Yeah, I think adding to what Karen said, the key in blended finance is not to be married to a specific structure. We may have to course correct as we go along. Markets change, technologies change, and there may be force majeure events that may happen in the market that may necessitate us to course correct. I think that what is required is some degree of flexibility among those institutions that provide blended finance, that look, markets change, and we may also have to course correct and change our structure as we go along.
Thanks, Rajiv. And Charlotte, thanks for the question. I hope you feel like we've got somewhere to an answer. I like the focus on design and how do we just move that to implementation. All of us on this panel, I think, have a sense of a little bit of impatience, right? We want to get out there and do the work that we need to do. Any other questions coming in from the floor? There's one right at the back. And there's one right at the front. Two. Okay. Can we get a mic to the... Do we no longer have one at the back?
Hello? Yeah, I think it's now working. Yeah, my name is Jasper Onyango from the Private Infrastructure Development Group. I'm the Regional Technical Assistant in charge of their grants portfolio in Africa. And I was very much impressed by the point that Lindsay made on diversifying the company's portfolio, where we're not only targeting easy wins, because the reality in Africa is that we're operating in a heterogeneous space. And at times, for the sake of impact and to drive the objective that we are all here to discuss on the mitigating the climate change impacts, there are countries that will also need to benefit, even if they don't show great potential for helping you achieve your commercial objectives. Yeah, but the dilemma in the private sector is always how do you strike a balance between your impact objective and commercial objectives to also guarantee your financial sustainability as an organization. I just wanted to know how you managed to do that.
Okay. Could you remind me of your name? Could you just say your name again?
Jasper Onyango.
Jasper, thanks for the question, Jasper. We all ask ourselves these questions in different ways in different parts of our career. I'm really curious to get some answers to that question. Could I get the person at the front, though, to chime in first, though?
Sure, and it's not exactly a question, but actually just want to pick up on something Rajiv mentioned. And we've talked a lot about blended finance, including I on a previous panel. The blended finance is not necessarily concessional finance. And the one thing, both as a fund manager, operator, is that when GCF comes in, it's more than concessional finance. It's actually a large validation, very powerful validation of the climate idea itself, whether it's a fund or a project. And really the halo effect is even more value adding than the money itself. So it helps really crowd in other private capital. So would love to hear more from others on the panel on this, that it's not really about concessional capital alone.
Okay.
And market scale commercial Commercial success and market scale commercial success is very important for what I think Lindsay mentioned to actually get to outcomes in this space.
Great. So, Lindsay, you were about to say something when I went back out. So, could you take the question on impact versus commercial that Jasper gave us? And then I want to come back to the panel on this halo effect question and whether concessionality, what does concessionality really mean, I think is that question. But jump in.
Yeah, no, great. And actually, I mean, I think my response to your question is very similar to this one. I mean, I think it's really exciting to think about which business models inherently and inextricably link returns with impact. And I believe they're there. And I'll just give you an example. In the solar home system space, even in the C&I space, where we're trying to bring solar energy to unelectrified regions, there was a period in the industry where everybody thought, well, let's really sell bigger systems with bigger gross margins because that's what investors need and that's where the returns are. And there was a temptation to move in that direction, but what we all learned was that was a very small market, and that actually focusing on the mass market and the most affordable solutions and decosting those, focusing our efforts, not making a shiny new solar home system with a TV and a fridge, but actually addressing the needs of the mass market was actually where the returns are. And I will tell you that a lot of the companies that continued to focus on that are the ones that are showing the best scale and return. So let's find those business models where we can determine they're inextricably linked, and let's put money behind those. And then we don't have to worry along the way, are we too much impact or returns? It's just scaling that solution, and that company will deliver both. And I think they're there. And then just one more quick response to that, though, and this is linked, is that when I found when we did that, the concessional money came behind us. And when the concessional money came behind us, it brought more equity in. And I'll just give one more example, is that we were looking at where to scale our company, and should we go to Ethiopia and Nigeria, or should we go to Zambia, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire? And USAID and CEDA structured a really interesting program where they said, if you go to one of the harder markets, like Zambia, that had an FX issue at the time, we will match your equity that you invest with grant. And they gave us a $4 million grant to match $4 million in equity to take our company there. And I would not have gone there without that. That equity would not have come in. And that market ended up being profitable in 2 years. And it was one of the best markets in our portfolio. And in the spreadsheets, it never looked that way. So again, I do think if we pick those business models, the concessional money can bring commercial capital behind companies and solutions and projects that can deliver both. That's just a thought.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. Brian, I'm going to bring you in on this this later point on the halo effect, but feel free to... Do you want to use my mic? You have one.
No, just speaking on concessional funding, indeed it is not free money, but there is a place, as Lindsay mentions, if you just take a step back, and I'll just speak from the perspective of sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at how electrification happened in North America or in Europe, after the war and whatnot, this happened through largely public funding, which is concessional, right? Now, here we're being asked a different question. We're being told, okay, you guys, we need to electrify, you need to provide electricity to all these people, you need to have renewable energy provision, but we also want, on the other side, on the demand side, we also want you to be able to show returns quickly, right? So there's an issue on development of these projects, or development of energy power plants, or what you want to call them. And then the other side, there's also an issue of show us demand immediately. Now, there's no else that this has been asked of people. So then you look and you say, where we are right now, then we would need concessional funding for this to happen, because we're not going to go out and be able to do what they call productive use day one. That was never asked of anyone else before elsewhere. So then that's where concessional funding is important. It is not free. And what we're asking for is, fine, let it not be free, but then give us time. Let the concessionality be, give us time, be patient. Because you know what? Elsewhere, this has happened. The second point is, again, we're just going back to the point of us being this transition I just wanted to stress the point that it's more than a transition, it's transformation. In our markets, we're going from, transition is you're going from A to B. Transformation is that you're going from zero, you had close to nothing, to actually creating something. It's like you're going from a larvae to a butterfly. Now that takes a different set of thought, different set of financing that has to come into thought. And again, there's place for concessionality in that thought, right? And also then different thinking. Let's not have the big grid-tied electricity. Let's have smaller solutions. And we've seen that with REP. By doing so, we're able to actually have a market development, because now you're able to have smaller developers come into this game. You're able to have engineers learn. In your big projects, you bring in your consultants from abroad, but now you're able to to develop local capacity. And so those are the innovative solutions. And again, there's room for concessionality in all that. And that's where it comes in. Yes, it is not free, but what we're asking is look at it as an enabler rather than here's free money, where then that you're discussing more about moral hazard in that the money is free, so I'm just going to misuse it. That is not what is being asked of us operating in these developing markets.
Right, Brian, thank you so much for that. So we're coming to the stage of the panel where we start to think about pulling it together and starting to wrap this up. I'm going to ask each of you in turn to walk down. Just give us some of your closing reflections, but I want you to be a bit pointed. I want you to maybe leave this room with the one key, your seminal thought that you want to leave this room with as we close up this panel. And Anita, we'll start with you, and then we'll come down. I know that makes Brian's job the hardest, but sometimes that happens, right?
Okay, I'll start with answering the question that I think anything and everything we do has to be financially sustainable. And there's a big burden on us as a group of people investing in climate solutions, because the standard understanding is that these are impact and therefore generally will not make returns and therefore risky and therefore not to be mainstreamed. So I think the more we can have examples, and what both of you mentioned, for example, of profitable projects that did well even in difficult markets, that goes a long way to reinforce this investing in the sector. So I would say it's incumbent on all of us to really go for financial sustainability as much as sustainability for the planet and people.
Thank you very much, and yeah, fully agree. And I think that this is also what I mentioned before about us coming in and show that it works. So that is something what you sometimes refer to as a demonstration effect or validation, as we also heard in the room. I would like us to leave this room with the impression that it is actually possible to crowd in institutional investors. This is something that we've been trying to do. And we all know that to be able to address the problem, we need the big money coming to the table. And to some extent, it's easier said than done, and you shouldn't fool yourself, because institutional capital, they definitely have their fiduciary responsibilities. They're not going to come there if they think that they're going to lose their money. But it is possible. And again, one example, we are in the Emerging Market Climate Action Fund, which is a fund that is co-managed between EIB and the Alliance. We, NDF, together with KfW, we have provided the junior equity, and institutional investors have actually invested. So Swedish insurance company Folksam and Allianz themselves, they have invested in, and it's the 1 to 3 ratio in the fund, and I think that the fund is now approximately 350 and will be bigger if the junior equity will be provided and increased even more. But some takeaways, some lessons learned. If you want to crowd in institutional investors, you have to think, of course, about the structure. How do you do it? And in this case, 3 simple learnings. It's a fund-in-fund structure, enabling bigger ticket sizes for the investors. It's a global fund, still emerging markets, but not focusing on one continent. It's a global fund, and it's a renewable energy fund. It's not evident for us and other investors who really try to find also possibilities and resilience and adaptation, but this is renewable energy. So you can do it. And now I think it's also time for us to, in a structured way, look into all the capital markets. How do we untap the capital markets? How do we create liquid bonds? How do we help countries? How do we help corporates to issue green bonds, enabling the institutional investors to invest also in these instruments, which are also tradable? So I think I used my time, but stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just listening to this panel in the last 2 days, I guess my thought for the group is to invest in the entrepreneurs, the corporate leaders, and the fund managers on the front lines of the climate challenges and opportunities you are trying to address. And I know it sounds obvious, but I think that too often we see a lot of the big money still sitting in Western markets and the decision makers there, and there's a hesitation to invest in first-time funders. Well, the reason a lot of us are not second-time fund managers is we didn't have that opportunity 20 years ago. And so I think that today, the more we can have a high bar and find world-class talent, but invest in the entrepreneurs, the corporate leaders, and the fund managers on the front lines, and let them do what they do well, I think that we're really going to accelerate the transition. And then one final note is, beyond energy, we have to think about agriculture in these emerging markets, because if people don't have food and people don't have income, they can't afford the energy. And I just want to put a call out there. Let's go beyond just energy and think about climate more holistically. Thank you.
2 points from my side. Love it or hate it, the halo effect is there in financial markets. I've been a commercial banker, infrastructure banker myself, and I've seen the halo effect playing out where we've done deals in my previous life that IFC or ADB may have looked at. And perhaps Brian may also testify to that. That's real. So if an institution like NDF were to say that this is a deal we are backing, GCF were to say this is a deal we are backing, there may be others that follow. And EARF is an example. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, contrary to how commercial finance works, blended finance is a bit different. I think the job of blended finance is done when blended finance is not needed anymore. And that's an important distinction from commercial finance, which we must appreciate. I think someone yesterday mentioned blended finance is transitional, and that's an important point. Blended finance will not be there forever. Once we achieve a certain scale, markets develop, we would not be needed, and that's our job. I think that's something that must be appreciated.
Yeah, Amar, as you mentioned, it's going to be a difficult one, but I'll leave. My parting shot is just this: let's get it done. That's all I want to say. I mean, let's not be here next year or the following year still talking about what solutions are needed. Rather, we'd be, presenting what we have done and what solutions we've brought about. So again, Lindsay, the talent is there, as you mentioned. Karine, we know the solutions. You mentioned the solutions. To my fellow other panelists, like, we know where the big money is. We know what they've told us, in terms of what they want for the money to flow. So let's just get it done and move on, so that next time we're here and we're talking, solutions that we've provided and that things are moving on.
Awesome, Brian. Can we actually just do a round of applause? That was just a great close. So look, leave it to me just to close with this panel to thank all of you for the conversation that we've just had, to thank all of you for the conversation we've just had because of the great questions that we had from the room. We've danced through an extraordinary narrative on this journey. I think we've talked about conviction, we've talked about courage, we've talked about what does it personally take to make the change that we want to see happen. We talked about, is this opportunistic, or are there opportunities here, or is there a crisis here? I think we've come out to say this is about us being impatient to get the work done, as Brian says, that we really need to do. Karen, you said, you can do it. Yeah, we can do it. This is what this is about, getting out there and showing what can be done. Lindsay, you talked about that as well. There's a really pragmatic element to this whole conversation. Yeah. The time is now. The technology is there. The policies are there. Anita was the spearhead on some of those policies way back in the day. And we have an opportunity to really act above the scale that we need to come up with a planet-sized solution, which is what we all need to do. So I just want to thank all of you, Anita, Karen, Lindsay, Rajiv, Brian, for an awesome conversation. Thank you all for the questions that you raised and for being here for this afternoon. Really appreciate this conversation and look forward to more. Bye for now.